I pray that you made the playoffs, and if you did, you're welcome. I did everything for you. And if you didn't, I'm sorry. You need to learn to manage your own fantasy football team. Now, let's go ahead. Let's dive into what changed today. And honestly, we had a decent amount of injuries, so it was a lot. So the Seattle game, nothing really changes. Darnold still streaming level quarterback. Charbonnet, Kenneth Walker still split in the backfield. You want to roster both. If one goes down, the other's a league winner. But if they're both healthy, it's really hard to play either guy. JSN remains the wide receiver 1 in fantasy, or the wide receiver 2 if you want to have Puka Nacua wide receiver 1. Regardless, S tier level wide receiver that you start every single week. Nothing changes in Seattle. Going over to the Atlanta Falcons. I know it seemed like they got boat raced in this game if you just look at the final score, but it was actually a pretty close game for the majority of it. It really got blown up in the second half. So the usage here, I think, is actually very predictive of what's going to happen in the future. Bijan has 20 carries. Bijan still gets involved as a receiver, so not really worried. Bijan's still going to be an S tier level running back for me. It was a tough matchup playing against the Seattle Seahawks. Algier remains a handcuff level running back. Bijan ready to go down. Algier's a league winner. Kyle Pitts remains a tight end. That's a player you have to start in any game in which you have no Drake London, but there is a chance that we get London back this next week. Now moving over to the Dolphins and the Jets. Here, maybe something would have changed with the running back room, which obviously Devon Achane performs well at the very beginning of the game. Looks like he's going to have a nuclear day and then ends up getting injured. So it doesn't really have that big of an impact. You would think Jalen Wright's potentially the top waiver wire pickup, but coach came out and said, you know what? If we weren't playing the Jets, maybe we would have had Devon Achane going back out there. He was still available if it was an emergency. I still will talk about Jalen Wright in the waiver wire video on Wednesday when we get more information about this Devon Achane injury, but I don't think you need to panic right now. Jalen Waddle, I have on my own fantasy team. I'm going to continue to start him every single week, take the good with the bad, and nobody else is startable in Miami. Now going over to the Jets, we are now on the Brady Cook era. Yeah, that is how ugly it is. You cannot start a single pass catcher now at this point with us on our third string quarterback for the New York Jets. And the only player that is startable for the Jets will be Breece Hall. He played 44 out of 58 snaps. The frustrating thing, as somebody who started Breece Hall this week, no involvement whatsoever as a receiver. Keep in mind, this was a good matchup against the Miami Dolphins, but I still plan on playing him in the fantasy playoffs. Now, going over to the Steelers and Ravens, I started DK Metcalf myself this week. We'll get there in a second, but Rodgers, never starting. Don't worry about it. The running back usage, I have Kenneth Gainwell on my bench. I would say that he still needs to remain there, but if you were to get an injury to Jalen Warren, Gainwell turns into a must-start running back, very similar to Tyler Algier. Jalen Warren still technically the starting running back in this backfield, still technically has the majority of the opportunities, but the snaps are pretty much split 26 to 25. So I'm not super excited about starting Jalen Warren any week going into the future. I do want to reiterate, I know we say this every single video, but Jalen Warren still has yet to score 20 fantasy points in a game this year. And then going over to DK Metcalf. Metcalf, I had in this game specifically as just a flex-worthy play, but not somebody you want to call a must-start option. I started him on my own team, just mainly I was desperate. It's a 12-team double flex format. Now, I'll probably continue to start DK Metcalf in the playoffs, but I'm not in love with it. I do love the fact that he did have 12 targets in this game, though. It's the best volume we've seen in quite some time. Lamar Jackson does look better in this contest. Lamar Jackson goes out there. He runs the ball, 43 rushing yards and the rushing touchdown. Lamar at the same time gave you a decent amount of passing volume. I mean, obviously the last drive was very entertaining. Lamar is still a must-start quarterback every single week, but he's not an S-tier level option. Obviously nothing close to the true elite QB1 in Josh Allen. Derrick Henry remains a must-start running back every single week. He's going to be disappointing in a game in which he does not score a touchdown, but honestly, he's going to be A-okay in the games he does. And then looking at the pass catchers, the only pass catcher you could possibly start would be Zay Flowers. Really good game today. Doesn't score a touchdown, but he just is a lock almost every single week for double-digit fantasy points. And if Lamar does continue to get better over the next few weeks, I think he can go from flex option to wide receiver 2. Now, going over to the Saints-Bucks game, the Devin Neal usage is going to be the number one thing to point out because obviously Tyler Shuck scores a couple touchdowns. Don't worry about Tyler Shuck. You never start him. But Devin Neal gets you the rushing touchdown, And at the same time, he plays the vast majority of the snaps here. Devin Neal, 41 snaps in comparison to Audric Estime at 10. So in any game in which you have no Kamara, which honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if we don't see Kamara again this year, Devin Neal very much is somebody that you could look at as a running back too based off volume. And then looking at the receivers / tight ends, the only name I'm ever going to want to start here is Chris Olave. Yes, Olave was disappointing, but it's because Tyler Shuck only had 13 completions, right? This is one of the very few games in which the New Orleans Saints not only were competitive, but they won this game, so they didn't have to go out there and throw the ball as much as they're used to. Olave is going to have better volume in future days. Now, going over to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, left tackle was out, one of the best left tackles in football, obviously impacts this offense. Baker Mayfield with no Tristan Wirfs doesn't look nearly as exciting. Going over and looking at the running back usage, he had 39 carries for this team that lost the game in comparison to 30 pass attempts. They were really trying to run the ball. Bucky Irving looked pretty damn good, obviously gets the receiving touchdown. But Rachaad White was very much involved. You actually had Rachaad White playing 36 snaps in comparison to Bucky Irving at 36, and Sean Tucker did see the field as well. So maybe it's hard to rank Bucky Irving as that top 6, 7, 8 running back, but he still is definitely a must-start player every single week. Chris Godwin has 8 targets. Igbuka has 9 targets. I would say that Igbuka is probably one of the biggest fallers. Over the past 6 games, he has like 1 game with double-digit fantasy points. I need to stop ranking him as a must-start option, especially if we get Mike Evans back this next week. Igbuka doesn't look nearly that exciting. Now, moving over to the Indianapolis Colts, Jacksonville Jaguars. Extremely sad for Daniel Jones. Daniel Jones playing through a stress fracture in his leg. Ends up tearing his opposite ACL. Can't imagine how much money he cost himself for playing through this injury. Trying to be a team player, doing the best that he can, and ends up costing himself more money than I could ever dream of making in my entire lifetime. Unbelievable. And now the Indianapolis Colts, they're in a really tough spot. You have Riley Leonard under center. I'm going to be moving Jonathan Taylor down my rankings. As Jonathan Taylor not going to have the receiving floor to save himself. He's kind of going to be a touchdown or bust running back, and the offense going to look worse now that you have just a much worse quarterback in. And then I know that Alec Pierce and Michael Pittman Jr. both get there this week, but I'm going to be moving every Indianapolis Colt down our rankings. My expectations are with no Daniel Jones, the implied team total, aka the projections for this offense every week, will be much, much worse. Then going over to Jacksonville, you end up getting Byshell Tootin with a fumble, and what that leads to is Travis Etienne playing more than he's played in a very, very long time. So Etienne is on the rise, a phenomenal day on his end. I know we didn't talk about the quarterbacks. Lawrence isn't interesting. You'd never start him. And then going over to the receivers, Brian Thomas leads his team in receiving, but you still had Jacoby Myers leading this wide receiver room in opportunities. Jacoby Myers had 10 targets in comparison to Brian Thomas with 6. And Jacoby Myers had a couple artificial touches as well with 3 carries. So I would say that Jacoby's still probably the wide receiver 1 here. He also came away with the receiving touchdown. Obviously, Tim Patrick did something with no Parker Washington, but the last thing you're ever going to do is think that you could start Tim Patrick. Now, moving over to the Tennessee Titans and Cleveland Browns. With Tennessee, Cam Ward, never start him, not worth talking about. I have Tony Pollard on my own fantasy team. So maybe you would think I'm going to come out here and go, yippee-ki-yay. Yeah, we have 160 rushing yards from Pollard this week. We have multiple rushing touchdowns. He's going to make it. No, I would never start Tony Pollard. The only instance I'm ever starting Tony Pollard is if somehow the Titans are favored in the game, which is never going to happen. Or if Tajay Spears is ruled out, then at that point, Tony Pollard is going to have 100% of the snaps. But if Spears is playing, even if Pollard's coming off a really strong performance like this, there's not a single Tennessee Titan that's worth ever starting, including the wide receivers. Going over to the Cleveland Browns, super surprising to see how this played out. Shedeur Sanders, ton of passing volume. They let him drop back 45 times in this game, and they gave Quinshon Judkins 14 carries. So this was the Shedeur Sanders game. In terms of if you would ever start him, no. I know he scored a ton of fantasy points in this one, but if you were picking up and starting Shedeur Sanders in a one quarterback league this next week, you are a certified crazy person. Quinshon Judkins, still an interesting start. Still a tough start knowing that he's not going to have a massive receiving role. And at the same time, the Browns aren't going to win a lot of football games. Shedeur Sanders and the Cleveland Browns just lost to the Tennessee Titans. Let me remind you that. The big thing that changes here is David Njoku gets banged up. So with David Njoku getting injured, Harold Fannin, who is a tight end on my bench, I swear to God, I thought I put this dude in my starting lineup over Dallas Goedert. I ranked him over Dallas Goedert on the site this week, and I'm an idiot and started Goddard. Doesn't matter. I already locked up the bye regardless of my league. But anyway, Harold Fannin was the tight end on my bench, and I very much am going to be planning on starting Harold Fannin if you have no David Njoku in the future. Harold Fannin was already playing a career-high amount of snaps, running a career-high amount of routes. He comes through, looks phenomenal in this game, 11 targets, over 100 receiving yards, and the receiving touchdown. That's with David Njoku scoring that receiving touchdown, which he got injured on. So I think in Cleveland, now you have two rookies that are startable, Judkins, Harold Fannin, and that's about it. Now, something I owe a massive apology to everybody for. I thought that Jaden Daniels was startable this week. I thought that Terry McLaurin was startable this week. And I thought that Deebo Samuel was startable this week. I could not have been more wrong. Jaden Daniels looked like he got infected with whatever J.J. McCarthy had, and J.J. McCarthy transferred it to Jaden Daniels. This offense looks horrendous. Jaden Daniels gets re-injured. We have to reevaluate the entire Commanders' pass-catching options. Zach Ertz goes down for the season. Like, just absolutely brutal. I would be surprised if we see Jaden Daniels another time this year. The Commanders are 3-10 at this point. He just went down again. So, I don't know. Terry McLaurin, Deebo Samuel, nothing more than flex consideration. Chris Rodriguez, I would never start him because he's never going to catch the ball. He's a touchdown or bust running back on a 3-10 team. So, yeah, absolutely sucks for the Commanders. And then going over to the Vikings, shout out to everybody who's stuck with Justin Jefferson. Shout out to everybody who's stuck with Jordan Addison. Y'all know we looked at the Vegas projections. We went, the Vikings, they project to score like 22, 23 points this week. So, honestly, the sports books are telling us McCarthy's going to bounce back. Y'all should start Justin Jefferson with confidence. And I'm really happy that we said that because the Minnesota Vikings this game win by 31 points and Justin Jefferson has 11 receiving yards. Phenomenal. Very rarely ever going to see the Minnesota Vikings score 30 points. And even in the game in which they score 30 points, the only viable name, Josh Oliver is the only guy that's anything. So it's crazy that this team scores 31 points, and I feel like we need to be lowering them down our rankings. Now, moving over to our next name, we are going to be looking at the Cincinnati Bengals and the Buffalo Bills. Cincinnati, Joe Burrow remains a must-start quarterback every single week. The Bengals defense is garbage. They're going to be throwing the ball a ton. With the running back utilization, you actually do see significantly more snaps for Samaje Perine in comparison to the secondary running backs in Cincinnati when Perine was out. This is going to negatively impact Chase Brown. Now, the positive with Chase Brown is he had 2 touchdowns in this game. So, frankly, it didn't really impact his fantasy production in this one. But in my rest of season rankings, I actually may move Chase Brown down just a bit. T. Higgins has himself a phenomenal day. T. Higgins remains a must-start name. Mike Gesicki has himself a day. I'm not going to be super excited about Gesicki, though, because I am expecting Jamar Chase to do much better in the future. Of course, I would still view Jamar Chase very easily as a top 5 receiver. Now, moving over to the Buffalo Bills end of things. Josh Allen, thank you for doing Josh Allen things, buddy. You know, I love you. Honestly, feel kind of bad having Josh Allen on my team not needing the points this week, and then he goes out there and drops 1,000 of them. James Cook could have had a much bigger day if he didn't just fumble the ball, but so James Cook could have had a touchdown, didn't go his way. Still, James Cook, top 10 running back. Josh Allen still the QB1 overall. Dalton Kincaid still low-end tight end 1 that you need to start. But interestingly enough, Dalton Kincaid still not really out there playing much. I mean, he had 22 snaps out of 64 this week. I mean, that's been the trend all season now, though, if you look at the snap chart from PFF. Now, moving over to the Broncos Raiders. The Raiders are just garbage. there's not going to be much to say. RJ Harvey fully takes over as the 3-down running back here. He played 50 out of 74 snaps for the Broncos. RJ Harvey looks like a must-start name every single week going into the future. Troy Franklin was not involved whatsoever. Troy Franklin is pretty much droppable at this point, and Cortland Sutton's the wide receiver 1 in Denver. Now, going over to the Raiders, what you really need to question is, will Kenny Pickett be better than Geno Smith? And here's my thought process on it. I don't see how Kenny Pickett could be worse than Geno Smith. We've already hit rock bottom in this offense. Obviously, it was going to be a tough matchup for Ashton Jeanty. I would still say Ashton Jeanty, based off volume, is going to be a running back that you start as an RB2. Brock Bowers, you still start every single week. You still start no wide receivers, and it is just living hell in the Raiders offense. Now, going over to the Bears-Packers, one of my favorite games on the week. Looking at Caleb Williams, the box score did not look good, but honestly, real life, I thought Caleb Williams played quite well. Interception at the end of the game was 4th down, like they had to try to go for something. Looking at the running back usage, DeAndre Swift, Kyle Monangai, kind of split it. Swift plays 40 snaps comparison to Kyle Monangai at 29. Swift's more so going to be the receiving back. Kyle Monangai is more that first and second down grinder. And neither running back is a must-start name by any means, but both are in consideration. And if either were to go down, the other turns into a league winner. And then going over and looking at the pass catcher usage, Luther Burden sees a career high in snaps when you have no Rome Odunze. Luther Burden is the wide receiver 1 in my rankings rest of season for the Chicago Bears. Colson Loveland also gets a small bump up as well with no Rome. Then the Packers into things, Jordan Love, I would still just have kind of as a streaming option. Josh Jacobs, still a locked and loaded top 10 running back. Christian Watson, still the wide receiver 1 in Green Bay, but Watson did only have 4 targets in this game despite having the multiple receiving touchdowns. I would say if I was ever going to start a Green Bay wide receiver, it's Watson, but they still spread the ball out so damn much in this offense that it's hard to trust anybody. And you can go ahead and cut Matthew Golden now that you have Jaden Reed back in. Now, the Rams-Cardinals, we knew Stafford was going to come out slinging. What I did not know is Blake Corum was going to have multiple rushing touchdowns. But regardless, Stafford's still a must-start quarterback every week. Kyron, still a must-start running back every week. Blake Corum, I'm never really putting in my lineup. The Rams aren't going to score 45 points every week going into the future. But Blake Corum is that premium handcuff running back. If anything were to occur to Kyron, Blake Corum turns into a league winner. And then Puka Nacua, S-tier level wide receiver. Devontae Adams, still a must-start name, even though he didn't score a touchdown in this one. And then going over to the Cardinals, Jacoby Brissett, still streaming level quarterback because they are just going to let him drop back 50 times a game. The running backs, nobody is startable here. I was hoping we were going to get Trey Benson back in, but it looks like that's not happening this season. Benson may be out for the year. Now, I drafted a ton of Michael Wilson in Underdog Best Ball Draft, so I am the luckiest man on this planet. But I want to admit, I'm the luckiest man on this planet. I never knew that this was his kind of upside. He looks like he's not just a must-start wide receiver every week that you have no Marv. He looks like he is a top 5 wide receiver every week that you have no Marvin Harrison. Absolutely incredible. But I think that's all I got for you. Again, I want to remind you, if you made the playoffs in your league, you're welcome. I did a ton for you. If you missed the playoffs in your league, I'm sorry. Manage your own fantasy team. You got to get better, kid. But much love. I really appreciate you. And I really hope I get to see you out in the live stream on Monday.